Hello and welcome back to Stones That Speak. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about some thoughts that I had triggered in me after I watched a video on a lovely little channel called The Meaning Code. It's hosted by Karen Wong, who is a really great conversation dialogos partner to some really interesting people, and she was speaking with a gentleman named Jeremy about the concept of zero and how this played out in sort of Western philosophy, and how the idea of zero being nothingness clashed with a whole bunch of stuff in all of the West, and how it played out in different ways. And I'm not going to talk about any of that because all that stuff was awesome. And I wouldn't have anything to add, really. I probably don't have anything to add as it is, but I definitely wouldn't have had anything to add to that. But about 45 minutes into the video, Karen and Jeremy got to talking about Platonism. Now, full disclosure, I am not a Platonist. I do not have a deep, full, rich understanding of Plato and his teachings. I would not want to represent myself as such, but I've studied, right? I've been thinking about this stuff for a while, and I want to play you a clip from this interview and talk about the way that I think that Jeremy in this clip misrepresents. Maybe he doesn't even misrepresent. Let's say I'd like to present an alternate idea about the theory of forms. And he'll explain what the theory of forms is a little bit if you're not familiar. So I'm just going to dig into that right now.
The problem with Platonism is infinite regression, right?
Okay.
So if you have this infinite realm, so we have, let's say, a chair, and we look at a chair and we identify these certain parts as a chair. And what makes it a chair? Well, it has four legs, it has a back, well, I can sit on it, and that's what makes it a chair.
So I'm gonna jump ahead with my thought here and say that he said three things make a chair in this instance. To spoil where I'm going, only one of those things actually makes it a chair. Let's continue.
The problem with that, there's a couple of problems with that. One, if I look at a table and I recognize it as a table, but then I sit on the table, is it now a chair or a table? If I sit on the ground, does the ground become a chair? This is one of the problems with forms, right? So how far away from the idea of chair can I get? Can I have a chair?
Okay, I'm just going to stop it from there. That was the main thing I wanted to get to from that interview. And so that statement about forms coming on Karen's channel, Karen Wong in particular, like it was interesting because it was one of those moments where I don't know if you ever have these times where you watch something and you think like, well, you should say this. And I thought that in particular in this instance because Karen Wong is a huge fan of Jordan Peterson's book Maps of Meaning, right? There's the book Maps of Meaning, and she is frequently fond of pointing out that reality is not a grid full of objects, okay? That reality is instead a place in which actions can happen, all right? That this is the central theme, as far as I can tell. Having not read Maps of Meaning either, you can tell I'm a real novice about all this stuff. But from what Karen says, she brings that up frequently. That this is what that book's about. And she's very big on this book. And so I've gotten that from her, that the world is a place for action, not a collection of objects. So, let's apply that to this idea of the forms. Now, I can't, as I already mentioned, I'm not a Platonic scholar, and even if I was, Platonists, like real Platonists who, read it and read it and read it and read and read and read and read Plato over and over again, even those guys never completely agreed on what Plato really thought. So I can't tell you what Plato really thought. But I wanted to, let's say, extrapolate a possibility of what Plato thought based on some of the stuff he says in the dialogues, and linking it up with this idea that we have anachronistically from the future that Plato might have also had in his head, and I'll show you where I would point out that he would get that what we're dealing with in the forms, I think it's a mistake to say that there is a form of chair in the sense that there is a, let's say, a spiritual reality in which there is an object that is a chair, that all chairs that are chairs somehow participate. All right? Because if we're thinking about reality as a place for action and not as a collection of objects, then the spiritual world, the world of patterns, the world of forms, can't fundamentally be patterns of objects. They need to be patterns of action, and even possibly more fundamentally patterns of being, of a way, or a Tao if you want to go way over to the east, right? That there are ways that different objects can take part in, that can participate in. And so a chair participates in the action of being seated upon. All right? And he talks about this in the video, right? He says you can be seated on a table. You can be seated on the ground. You can be seated on a stump of a tree, right? So the chair has to participate in that action. It has to participate in that no matter what. It's not a chair if you can't sit on it. If it's covered in spikes, even if it's shaped like a chair, it's not a chair because you can't sit on it. We've covered this in previous videos, right? It doesn't participate in the form of being seated. Now, let's take a kitchen chair. A kitchen chair doesn't just participate in the form of being seated. It also participates in things like efficiency of use of materials. Right? So let's say I'm a carpenter. I want to build a chair. I could just carve it straight out of a log. I could just have a solid log chair, and the bottom of it is just thick log, right? Square or round or however I want. And then there's a back that comes up, and that's my chair. That would participate perfectly well in the letting me sit down part of the chair. It doesn't participate very well in the using of materials efficiently that humans tend to participate in. So the carpenter is going to cut the log into pieces and use the pieces to make a chair. Now, the chair has to participate in being seated, which means there's a stability that has to happen. So the chair needs to have a certain number of legs. If it has 2 legs, it's really not going to be stable. 3 legs, we're pretty good, but like, it could be better. If you get 5 legs, you don't need no 5 legs, right? So then we sort of zero in on 4 legs, not because the form of the chair, right? The chair that God has in heaven has 4 legs, okay? But because the world as we see it lays itself out in such a way that 4 legs is a good option for giving you balance of your chair and yet not wasting materials. And then we can go further into other things, right? Like I have this chair right here, which participates not only in the form of being seated, but also in the form of being seated at my desk. So it has little places for my arms to rest. that you can't see on the camera. But anyway, they're there. If I go and sit down at my kitchen table, those chairs, the ones I have, don't have armrests because I want to be able to scoot all the way into the table. I want to sit there. That chair participates in the way of sitting at a table, right? So there's more than just sitting. Now you're sitting in conjunction with the place. You're conforming your body to the chair. You're participating in a way. The chair is participating in a way. And both of those things are conformed to the form of the table so you can sit around a table and eat with your family. My easy chair, where I sit and watch TV, does not conform to that. It's still a chair. It still participates in the form of letting you be seated. It doesn't participate in the form of letting you being seated at a table. Now, I want to prove to you that I'm not making this up. So I actually did look up some original Plato, and let me pull this stuff up here. Okay, so this is from the Cratylus. And Plato's talking about what is going on in this world of the forms. And he says, what has the carpenter in view when he makes a shuttle? Is it not something the nature of which is to weave? All right, so you're a carpenter, right? You want to make a shuttle for a loom. You're trying to create an object that participates well in the loom. Now again, I can't mind read Plato. Right? And he later on he says, if the shuttle breaks while he's making that, will he make another with his mind fixed on that which is broken, or on that form with reference to which he was making the one which he broke? And Hermogenes says, well, in that form, obviously. And then Plato says, which one should we call the real shuttle? Now, from that line, it seems like Plato is actually having in his mind the idea that maybe there's a real heavenly spiritual shuttle somewhere that exists in this world of the forms and that the craftsman is casting his eyes on. But again, I'm going to be really bold and suggest that a better way to think about that is to understand, as he says at the beginning, that the shuttle has to participate in the nature of what it is to weave. Of course, there are many, if not an infinite number, of objects that might participate at least functionally well with that purpose. But ultimately, it's necessary to bring down the purpose into the world of objects, to create an object that participates in the purpose. There is not, I think, properly understood in the world of form a perfect car or a perfect shuttle. We have in our minds kind of a mushy idea of a car, but what you want when you want to create a car is to create a solution to a way of being. The car needs to move you. It needs to move you faster than you can walk, but without costing you more than you can afford. It would help if it moves more than one person, right? All of these things are essentially functions into which we then descend several different forms of car. You might want a car that drives really well on ice or in mud or on a highway or goes up hills really well or holds lots and lots of kids. Right? All of these different ways can be brought down from the world of forms and participate in the car. But it's a mistake to think that somewhere up on the world of forms there's a van and a car and a truck, and then when we get to an SUV thing, we're not sure where we're going to put it. Is it a truck or is it a van? No. All right, that's not... that doesn't make sense to me. It seems like Plato would probably look at that and say there's something wrong with that. But there are ways to which we can conform ourselves, in which to things in the world are conformed. Trees conform themselves to the way of being a tree, right? Which includes things like converting soil into nutrients and taking in the light of the sun for energy and converting carbon dioxide into oxygen. It took me a second, but I got there. I remembered my 5th grade science. And yet there are many, many multiplications of trees that are able to do these things, right? And then you would say, well, what makes it a tree and not a plant? And I would say, well, maybe because it participates in the way of having wood, which would be something that you can cut up and use to support yourself in some sense. And so you can say things that do all these things and check all these boxes, they are participating in the way of treeness because they participate in all these other ways which we associate with trees. And that's not just an abstract differentiation, right? Because from the Christian point of view, what we know about Christ is that he's the way, right? I've been memorizing, I believe it's Deuteronomy 32. And one of the things that is said about God in that chapter is that all his ways are judgment, right? Not in the sense of like raining down hellfire on you, although that'll happen sometimes. But no, the judgment of like, this is good, this is bad, this is a tire, this is not a tire. That guy's doing okay. That guy needs to work on it. You know, all these things, right? This is the entirety of God's way is judgment, and Jesus said, I am that way. And so when we're supposed to be in Christ as Christians, it's not about being in his physical, objective personage. It's not about saying, how can I look like Jesus, right? What did Jesus have, brown hair or blonde hair? I need to look like him, so I want to be conformed to him. No, you're being conformed to a way, to the way, right? The way in which all other ways that are worthwhile are bound up, or maybe the way that all other ways point to, or it gets complicated. But ultimately, this is, I think, concordant with Scripture and the idea that we aren't trying to conform in some objective, materialistic sense to Christ. We don't need to know how long his fingers were and worry that ours aren't the same length, or to think about how long his hair was and get the same haircut. That's not what it means to be conformed to the image of Christ. Because the image of Christ, the form of Christ, is the way of life. It's the way that we're supposed to be living. It's the pattern of life that we are supposed to have, the faith that we are supposed to live in and by. All of that stuff is not based in something that is an object. You don't need to go up into heaven and see what the real chair looks like to make a good chair. What you need to do is understand what it means to be seated comfortably. Then you can make a good chair. You need to understand what it means to be seated comfortably at a dinner table. And then you can make a good dinner chair. The problem of infinite regression is only a problem if we think of these forms as being substance in the sense of materiality. But if we take that substance and we abstract it out and we think about that, really what makes a thing is its purpose and its ability to be aligned to a particular way and be conformed to a particular pattern of being, then we can understand that there isn't necessarily a problem of infinite regression. That's it. That was a thought that I had. It's been bouncing around in my head. I don't know if it was any good or not, but I wanted to get it out there and share it with y'all. Maybe you can tell me if it was stupid or not. Maybe Karen Wong will watch this. I'll send it to her because I have a big ego and I'd love it for her to see it and tell me what she thinks. And I would love for you to tell me what you think in the comments below. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I'll see you next time with something else.